I came home from vacation to find my locks changed and a sheriff's deputy waiting with eviction papers. HOA president Karen claimed I was trespassing on her property. Problem was, I owned the house and had the deed to prove it. What Karen didn't know would destroy her completely. Before you watch complete story, comment down from where you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is David Martinez and I'm a 38-year-old military contractor who travels frequently for work. I bought my house in Sunset Ridge Estates 3 years ago specifically because it was a quiet neighborhood perfect for someone who's away for weeks at a time. The house is a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage, sitting on a corner lot with mature oak trees. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with cash from my deployment savings. No mortgage, no debt, just pure ownership with all the paperwork filed properly at the county courthouse. The neighborhood was peaceful until Karen Thompson moved in across the street 6 months ago. Karen, 52, recently divorced pharmaceutical sales rep from Chicago, arrived with an attitude bigger than her designer SUV and immediately set about improving everything around her. Within 2 weeks, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president by promising to restore property values and eliminate problem properties. In Karen's world, a problem property was anything that didn't look like a magazine cover 24/7. She started with small complaints. My grass was 2 inches too tall according to HOA guidelines that didn't exist until she wrote them. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 30 minutes on trash day, violating her new aesthetic standards. My mailbox needed repainting to match the community color scheme she'd invented. I tolerated the harassment because I was traveling constantly for work. Easier to pay small fines and make cosmetic changes than fight a neighbor war while living out of hotel rooms across 3 time zones. But Karen was building toward something bigger. I just didn't realize how big until I came home from a 6-week project in Dubai to find my entire life had been stolen. Tuesday evening, August 15th, 7:30 p.m. My Uber pulled into the driveway after a 20-hour flight from Dubai. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and looking forward to sleeping in my own bed for the first time in 6 weeks. The first sign something was wrong was my front door. The brass handle had been replaced with a silver one, and there was a new deadbolt I didn't recognize. I figured the HOA had mandated security upgrades and my property manager had handled it while I was away. My key didn't work. I tried the back door, the garage entry, even the basement window I sometimes used when locked out. Nothing. Every lock on my house had been changed. Standing in my own backyard, confused and frustrated, I called my property manager Steve. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried my neighbor Jim, who'd been watching my house. No answer. That's when I heard the police sirens. 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into my driveway with flashing lights. Karen emerged from her house wearing silk pajamas and a satisfied smirk, pointing at me like I was public enemy number 1. That's him, she told the officers. The trespasser I called about. He's been lurking around the property for 20 minutes trying to break in. Deputy Williams, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, approached me with his hand resting on his radio. Sir, I need to see some identification. The property owner has reported you for criminal trespassing. Property owner? I said, pulling out my wallet. I am the property owner. This is my house. Karen stepped forward with a manila folder thick with documents. Officers, I have the deed right here. This property belongs to me. This man is obviously confused or lying. I stared at her in complete disbelief. Karen, you live across the street. You've seen me coming and going from this house for 3 years. Sir, Deputy Williams said, examining Karen's papers, these documents show Ms. Thompson owns this property. Do you have proof of ownership? My proof was inside the house I couldn't enter. The deed, purchase agreement, insurance papers, tax records. Everything was in my filing cabinet in the home office that I was now apparently trespassing on. My documents are inside, I explained. I just returned from a 6-week business trip. Someone changed my locks while I was away. Karen's expression was pure theatrical concern. Officers, this man has been harassing me for months. Making threats, vandalizing property, causing disturbances. I finally got legal ownership of this abandoned property through proper channels. The second deputy, Officer Martinez, looked skeptical. Sir, can anyone verify you live here? Neighbors, family, utility companies? I tried calling Jim again. No answer. Steve's phone was still off. In my jet-lagged confusion, I couldn't remember my utility account numbers or insurance agent's contact information. I need to call my attorney, I said, realizing this was beyond a simple misunderstanding. You can make your calls from the station, Deputy Williams said. Right now, we have documentation showing you're trespassing on someone else's property. They didn't arrest me, but they escorted me off my own property with a warning that returning would result in criminal charges. I stood on the sidewalk watching Karen lock up my house with keys I'd never seen before. I spent that night at a Hampton Inn, using their business center to print every document I could access online. Bank records showing mortgage payments to myself. Insurance policies listing me as owner and beneficiary. Tax records with my name as the property taxpayer. The trail of evidence was overwhelming. I'd owned 1247 Oak Street for 3 years, 2 months and 16 days. Every utility, every tax payment, every insurance premium traced back to my accounts. But Karen somehow had documents claiming ownership too. Thursday morning, I hired attorney Rebecca Chin, who specialized in property fraud and HOA disputes. Her office overlooked downtown, and she had the kind of reputation that made other lawyers nervous. "David," she said, spreading my documents across her conference table, "this is either a massive clerical error or deliberate fraud. Either way, we're going to fix it." Rebecca's investigation started with the county recorder's office. The deed Karen showed police was filed just 2 weeks ago, claiming she'd purchased the property through adverse possession and abandonment proceedings. The filing was complete nonsense. Adverse possession requires years of open, continuous occupation. Abandonment proceedings require extensive legal notice and court approval. Karen had done none of this. She'd simply filed fake documents claiming ownership. "This is criminal fraud," Rebecca said, showing me copies of Karen's bogus filing. She forged ownership documents and filed them with the county. That's multiple felonies. But criminal charges would take months to process. I needed immediate access to my home and protection from further harassment. Rebecca filed emergency motions for injunctive relief and restoration of property access. We also requested criminal referrals to the district attorney's office for fraud, forgery, and filing false documents. While Rebecca handled legal strategy, I started investigating Karen's background. What I discovered was terrifying. Karen Thompson wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a serial property fraudster who'd been running similar schemes across 3 states. Her pattern was always the same: target properties with absent owners, file fraudulent ownership claims, then use legitimate-looking paperwork to convince authorities she was the real owner. Her ex-husband Brad had divorced her specifically because of her real estate acquisition hobbies that had cost him his law license and nearly landed him in federal prison. She'd been evicted from her previous neighborhood in Chicago for attempting to claim ownership of a neighbor's vacation home. The pharmaceutical company she claimed to work for had fired her 8 months ago for falsifying sales records. She was facing bankruptcy, foreclosure on her rental house, and multiple lawsuits from previous fraud victims. My property was just her latest target in a career of stealing other people's homes. Even worse, she'd been planning this for months. My property manager Steve revealed that Karen had been calling regularly, claiming to be my sister, checking on the house while I was deployed. She'd gathered information about my travel schedule, emergency contacts, and property management arrangements. "She seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being," Steve said apologetically. "Said you'd asked her to keep an eye on things and report any problems." Karen had used that information to time her takeover perfectly. She knew I'd be away for 6 weeks with limited communication. She'd changed the locks, filed fraudulent ownership documents, and prepared her victim narrative for when I returned. The most shocking discovery was that Karen hadn't acted alone. She'd convinced several neighbors that I was actually a problem tenant who'd been squatting in an abandoned property. Mrs. Patterson from next door admitted that Karen had told her I was a dangerous drifter who'd been illegally occupying the house. She said the real owner lived overseas and had asked her to handle the eviction, Mrs. Patterson said shamefully. Tom and Linda from 2 houses down had been told I was involved in drug trafficking and that Karen was working with federal agents to investigate my activities. She showed us official-looking documents about an ongoing investigation, Tom said. Even my friend Jim had been manipulated. Karen told him I'd asked her to house-sit while I was away and that any appearances I might make were probably me checking on things before moving out permanently. The neighborhood conspiracy explained why no one had questioned the lock changes or Karen's sudden claim to ownership. She'd spent months building false narratives that made her takeover seem legitimate and necessary. Rebecca discovered that Karen had used similar community manipulation tactics in her previous schemes. She was skilled at identifying absent property owners and convincing neighbors that she was solving problems rather than creating them. Rebecca's emergency motions moved through the court system faster than expected. Judge Patricia Flores had seen property fraud cases before and wasn't impressed with Karen's documentation. "Miss Thompson," Judge Flores said during the hearing, Your adverse possession claim lacks any supporting evidence of actual possession. Your abandonment filing shows no attempt at proper legal notice. These documents appear to be fabricated. Karen's attorney, a nervous young man who'd obviously been lied to about the case facts, tried to argue that his client had been acting in good faith to secure abandoned property for community safety. Judge Flores wasn't buying it. Counsel, your client filed ownership documents for property she never purchased, never possessed, and never had any legal claim to. That's not community service, that's fraud. The judge's order was comprehensive and immediate. 1. Karen must return all keys and access to 1247 Oak Street immediately. 2. She was prohibited from entering the property or interfering with my access. 3. All fraudulent ownership documents were declared void. 4. Karen was ordered to pay my legal fees and hotel expenses. 5. The case was referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Walking back into my house for the first time in 5 days felt like reclaiming my life. But Karen's occupation had left disturbing evidence of her mental state. Inside my house, I found Karen had been living like she'd owned it for years. She'd moved in furniture, hung family photos, and even changed the Wi-Fi password to Karen's House 2023. My personal belongings had been packed into boxes labeled previous tenant items and stored in the garage. She'd thrown away photos of my late wife Maria, claiming they were left behind junk from the squatter. The violation was deeply personal. Maria's jewelry, including her engagement ring, was missing from our bedroom safe. Karen had somehow figured out the combination and stolen everything valuable. My home office had been completely ransacked. Tax documents, insurance papers, and personal files were scattered everywhere. Karen had obviously been searching for information she could use to support her ownership claims. Most disturbing was finding a notebook where Karen had been practicing my signature and making notes about my personal history. She'd been planning to impersonate me for insurance claims and financial transactions. The theft of Maria's jewelry was the final straw. This wasn't just property fraud, it was personal destruction designed to erase my history and replace it with Karen's fantasy ownership. Rebecca filed additional charges for burglary, theft, and identity fraud. She didn't just steal your house, Rebecca said. She tried to steal your entire identity. The district attorney's office assigned Detective Sarah Kim to investigate Karen's property fraud scheme. Detective Kim specialized in white-collar crime and had prosecuted similar cases involving property theft and document forgery. Mr. Martinez, Detective Kim said during our first meeting, your case is part of a much larger pattern. We're investigating similar frauds in 3 other counties where Ms. Thompson operated. The investigation revealed that Karen had attempted property theft at least 12 times over the past 5 years. Most victims had been military personnel, traveling professionals, or elderly people with limited family support. Her method was always similar: identify absent property owners, gather personal information through deception, file fraudulent ownership documents, then use community manipulation to legitimize her takeover. 3 previous victims had lost their homes entirely because they lacked resources to fight back or didn't discover the fraud until it was too late. Karen had successfully stolen over $400,000 in property through her various schemes. My case was unusual because I'd returned during the early stages of her takeover and had resources to fight back immediately. Most victims discovered the fraud months later when they tried to refinance or sell properties they no longer legally owned. Detective Kim's investigation also uncovered Karen's financial motivation. She owed $127,000 in credit card debt, had defaulted on her car payments, and was facing eviction from her rental house for non-payment. Stealing my property was supposed to solve all her financial problems. She planned to sell the house quickly and disappear with the proceeds before anyone could challenge her ownership claims. Word about Karen's property fraud scheme spread through local news faster than gossip at a church social. The story had everything reporters love: a sympathetic victim, an outrageous villain, and a shocking crime that could happen to anyone. Channel 7 News ran the story as military contractor returns home to find house stolen by neighbor. The segment included interviews with me, Rebecca, and Detective Kim explaining how property fraud schemes target absent homeowners. The media attention brought forward additional victims who'd been afraid to report Karen's harassment. Mrs. Chin revealed that Karen had been pressuring her to sign over power of attorney, claiming it was necessary for neighborhood security purposes. Mr. Rodriguez admitted that Karen had convinced him to give her copies of his house keys for emergency access coordination. She told him it was a new HOA requirement for properties with elderly residents. Even more disturbing, 3 families reported that Karen had been collecting detailed information about their finances, travel schedules, and family situations under the guise of community safety surveys. The investigation expanded as more evidence emerged of Karen's systematic preparation for property theft targeting multiple homes in the neighborhood. As criminal charges moved toward trial, Rebecca focused on civil litigation to recover damages from Karen's fraud scheme. The monetary losses were significant, but the emotional damages were devastating. Hotel expenses during my eviction, $847 legal fees for property recovery, $12,300 lost wages from delayed return to work, $8,200 replacement costs for stolen personal items, $15,600 security system installation, $3,400 emotional distress and invasion of privacy. Incalculable. But the real damage was psychological. Karen had violated my home, stolen irreplaceable mementos of my deceased wife, and made me feel unsafe in my own neighborhood. Rebecca's civil suit included claims for fraud, conversion, trespass, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also sued for punitive damages to deter Karen from attempting similar schemes against other victims. The civil discovery process revealed even more shocking details about Karen's criminal enterprise. She'd maintained detailed files on dozens of potential property targets, including photographs, financial estimates, and vulnerability assessments. My file contained photos of my house from multiple angles, notes about my travel schedule, copies of my utility bills she'd somehow obtained, and even Google Earth screenshots showing property boundaries and access points. Karen had been stalking me and planning property theft for over 6 months before making her move. As Karen's criminal trial approached, the neighborhood began healing from the trauma of her manipulation and fraud. Many residents felt guilty about being deceived into supporting her false ownership claims. Mrs. Patterson organized a block party to apologize and show community support. "We should have questioned her stories instead of believing them," she said tearfully. "You're our neighbor and we failed to protect you." The HOA voted unanimously to remove Karen from all positions and ban her from attending meetings or participating in community decisions. They also implemented new policies requiring verification of any ownership claims before taking enforcement actions. Tom and Linda helped me restore my house to its original condition, removing Karen's belongings and helping sort through the personal items she'd packed away. Finding some of Maria's photos undamaged in the garage was an emotional relief. Jim became my unofficial security coordinator, keeping watch on the property during my future travels and maintaining contact with neighbors about any suspicious activity. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive, but the violation of trust would take time to fully heal. Karen's manipulation had made everyone question their judgment and feel vulnerable to future deception. Karen's criminal trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in February. The courthouse was packed with neighbors, media representatives, and other fraud victims who'd been waiting years for justice. Prosecutor Janet Rodriguez presented overwhelming evidence of Karen's property fraud scheme. Bank records, forged documents, witness testimony, and recorded conversations painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Rodriguez said in her opening statement, "the defendant didn't just steal a house. She stole a life, a history, and the security that comes from knowing your home is truly yours." Karen's defense attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed the property was abandoned and was acting to protect community interests. The argument fell apart when presented with evidence of her deliberate deception and previous fraud convictions. The trial lasted 6 days. Witnesses included me, Detective Kim, multiple neighbors, previous fraud victims, and handwriting experts who confirmed Karen had forged documents. The most powerful testimony came from Margaret Willis, an elderly woman in Phoenix whose house Karen had successfully stolen 3 years earlier. Mrs. Willis had lost her home of 40 years and died in a nursing home while still fighting to recover her property. "Karen Thompson destroys lives for profit," Mrs. Willis's daughter testified. "She targets vulnerable people and steals everything they've worked for. She needs to be stopped before she ruins more families." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Grand theft, felony guilty. Fraud, felony guilty. Forgery, felony guilty. Filing false documents, felony guilty. Burglary, felony guilty. Identity theft, felony guilty. Judge Michael Harrison sentenced Karen to 8 years in state prison plus 5 years probation. She was also ordered to pay $247,000 in restitution to all victims and register as a property fraud offender. "Ms. Thompson," Judge Harrison said during sentencing, You have systematically targeted honest homeowners and stolen their most precious possession, their homes. Your crimes strike at the foundation of property ownership that our society depends upon. The sentence was longer than expected because of Karen's multiple previous convictions and the systematic nature of her fraud enterprise. The judge also noted that her targeting of military personnel made her crimes particularly heinous. Karen showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining that she was the victim of a conspiracy by ungrateful neighbors who didn't appreciate her community leadership. The civil lawsuit concluded 6 months after Karen's criminal conviction. Since she had no significant assets, Rebecca focused on seizure and liquidation of anything valuable to compensate for my damages. Karen's car, jewelry, furniture, and electronics were sold at auction. The proceeds, combined with seized funds from her bank accounts, totaled $31,400 toward my $47,000 in documented damages. More importantly, the civil judgment included a permanent restraining order prohibiting Karen from contacting me or entering my neighborhood upon her release from prison. Rebecca also secured agreements with Karen's previous landlords and creditors to share information about any future addresses or employment, ensuring we could monitor her activities after prison release. The financial recovery is limited, Rebecca explained, but the legal protections and criminal conviction will follow her forever. She'll never be able to run this kind of scheme again. The civil case also established legal precedent for property fraud victims, making it easier for future victims to recover damages and obtain protective orders. The experience taught me valuable lessons about home security and property protection, especially for people who travel frequently for work. I installed comprehensive security systems including cameras, motion sensors, and remote monitoring that alerts me immediately to any unusual activity. The system also provides video evidence that would prevent future fraudulent ownership claims. I established relationships with 3 different neighbors who check on the property regularly and have authority to contact police about suspicious activity. Having multiple sets of eyes makes it harder for anyone to manipulate the entire community. My attorney Rebecca helped me file protective documents with the county recorder's office that require additional verification for any future ownership claims. The documents create legal barriers to fraudulent filings. I also joined a nationwide network of military and traveling professionals who share information about property security and fraud prevention. The network has prevented dozens of similar schemes by warning potential victims about suspicious activity. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about neighbors and community relationships. Karen's manipulation had succeeded because I'd ignored warning signs about her controlling behavior and invasive questions. 3 years after Karen's conviction, life had returned to normal with important improvements. The security measures and community relationships made my home safer than it had ever been. The neighborhood had grown closer through the shared experience of being deceived and learning to protect each other better. Regular community meetings focused on security awareness and fraud prevention rather than petty complaints about grass height. I started dating Linda Rodriguez, a nurse who'd been incredibly supportive during the legal battles. She understood the importance of security and privacy while still maintaining the warm, welcoming atmosphere that makes a house a home. The stolen jewelry was never recovered, but I'd found peace with losing those physical reminders of Maria. The memories and love couldn't be stolen, and building new relationships honored her memory better than clinging to material objects. My work had evolved to include consulting on property security for other military contractors and traveling professionals. The expertise gained from being victimized helped me protect others from similar schemes. Karen's conviction had broader impacts beyond my personal case. The media attention led to legislative changes strengthening penalties for property fraud and improving verification requirements for ownership document filings. The Martinez Act, passed the state legislature unanimously, requiring additional verification and notification procedures before county recorders can accept ownership transfers for properties with absent owners. Detective Kim used our case as a training example for law enforcement agencies across the region. The investigation techniques and evidence collection methods became models for other property fraud prosecutions. Real estate professionals began including fraud awareness in their client education programs. The case demonstrated how easily legitimate ownership could be challenged by criminals with minimal legal knowledge but significant criminal intent. Most importantly, the case encouraged other fraud victims to come forward rather than suffering in silence. Karen's conviction gave people hope that justice was possible even against skilled con artists with convincing documentation. Karen's prison experience was reportedly difficult. Property fraud is considered a low-status crime among inmates, and her attitude of superiority didn't win friends in a maximum security facility. She filed multiple appeals claiming prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective counsel, and judicial bias. All appeals were denied, with courts noting that her conviction was supported by overwhelming evidence and appropriate legal procedures. Prison records showed Karen had received numerous disciplinary citations for attempting to manipulate other inmates and contraband possession. Her early release prospects were eliminated by poor behavior and refusal to participate in rehabilitation programs. Most tellingly, she continued claiming innocence and maintaining that all her victims were conspirators who'd framed her for crimes she didn't commit. The complete lack of remorse confirmed that imprisonment was the only way to protect potential future victims. 5 years after the initial fraud, the impact on my life had been ultimately positive despite the trauma and expense of fighting back. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about resilience, community, and the importance of standing up for yourself. The security improvements and community relationships made my home more valuable and enjoyable than it had been before Karen's attack. Property values in the neighborhood had increased due to the strong community bonds forged through shared adversity. My relationship with Linda had grown into marriage, and we were expecting our first child. The nursery was being built in the room where Karen had stored my previous tenant items during her brief occupation. The consulting work had evolved into a small business helping property owners protect themselves from fraud schemes. Working with other victims provided continuing purpose and meaning from my negative experience. Most importantly, I'd learned that home isn't just about legal ownership or physical security, it's about community, relationships, and the confidence that comes from knowing you can defend what matters most. The final chapter came when Karen was released from prison after serving 6 years of her 8-year sentence. The parole conditions included permanent prohibitions on HOA participation, real estate activities, and contact with any previous victims. She moved to a different state and found work in a call center under supervision by parole officers who monitored her activities and living situation. The property fraud conviction followed her everywhere, making it impossible to obtain housing, credit, or employment in positions involving trust or authority. Meanwhile, my life had flourished. The consulting business was thriving, my marriage was strong, and our daughter Emma was learning to walk in the same living room where Karen had once hung her family photos. The neighborhood had evolved into a model community where residents looked out for each other while respecting privacy and independence. The shared experience of being manipulated by Karen had created lasting bonds that made everyone safer and more connected. Property values had increased 23% since Karen's conviction, partly due to the strong community reputation and comprehensive security measures that now protected every household. Looking back on the experience, the most important lesson was that fighting back against fraud and bullying is always worth it, even when the odds seem impossible. Karen had advantages I didn't initially possess: fake documentation, community manipulation skills, and the element of surprise. But truth, persistence, and good legal representation ultimately prevailed over criminal deception. The financial cost of fighting back was significant, over $15,000 in legal fees and expenses. But the cost of not fighting would have been everything: my home, my security, my confidence, and Maria's memory. The community support that emerged during the crisis proved that most people want to do the right thing when they understand the truth. Karen's manipulation had worked temporarily, but honest relationships ultimately proved stronger than criminal deception. My advice to anyone facing similar fraud or harassment is simple: document everything, get professional help immediately, and never give up fighting for what's rightfully yours.